In the town of San Francisco del Monte, there was a woman who gave birth to a stillborn baby. She was so sad that she decided to abandon her child and left him in the nearby forest. As days passed by, the baby's body started to decompose and bloated, until one day it suddenly disappeared without a trace. The people in the community started to get worried and were finding out what really happened to the missing infant. They believed that an Aswang, a monster that feeds on human flesh, must have taken the baby. Aswangs are malevolent supernatural beings in Filipino folklore that feast on the flesh of their victims, particularly during pregnancy or when someone is already sick. They can shapeshift into different animals such as dogs, pigs, cats, birds and goats. They can also transform into spirits or apparitions, and they may even be able to change their form into a variety of grotesque hybrid creatures. In addition, these beasts are also said to be immune to firearms. This makes them truly terrifying and powerful monsters. The woman from earlier who we'll call Ailing Nino was so scared for her child. She didn't know if he was still alive or not, so she went to the forest to find him. What she found instead would shock her. One night, Ailing Nina awoke from her sleep to the sound of screams. She couldn't believe how loud they were. It was like nothing she had ever heard before. Were they human screams or animalistic growls? Unable to bear the noise, she went outside to investigate. That's when she saw a horrifying sight. Her baby's body was missing from the coffin, and then she heard the noise again. It sounded like someone or something was dragging something heavy through the forest. Without hesitation, Ailing Nina rushed to the forest. When she arrived at the place where she had buried her baby just 2 days ago, she noticed some fresh claw marks on the ground. The grave was also half open. At this point, she knew her baby was no longer inside. Just then, she heard a twig snap behind her. Ailing Nina quickly turned around to find the source, but all she saw was a pair of glowing red eyes staring back at her from the darkness. Before she could react, the creature lunged at her. Ailing Nina screamed for help, but no one came. She closed her eyes tight, waiting for the worst, but it never came. Slowly, she opened one eye, then the other. The beast was gone. The only thing that remained was a pool of saliva on the ground, which was still wet. That's when Ailing Nina noticed her baby's pacifier lying near the saliva. She picked it up and looked around. Even though she couldn't see the creature, she could feel its presence watching her from somewhere in the trees. Feeling a sense of urgency, she called out for her baby and ran deeper into the woods. All around her, she heard the screeches of birds and the rustling of leaves, as if the forest itself was coming alive and trying to stop her. After what felt like hours, she stumbled upon a clearing. In the middle stood a large tree with strange symbols carved into its bark, and at the base of the tree was a small cave hidden by thick vines. Ailing Nina cautiously approached the cave and peered inside. The darkness was so thick she could barely make out anything, but she could feel her baby's presence coming from inside. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the darkness. Inside the cave, Ailing Nina saw something that made her blood run cold. There in front of her were rows upon rows of skulls and bones, some of which were still attached to rotting flesh. Then she saw something that made her scream in horror. Her baby was lying on a stone altar in the center of the cave, and in front of him was a huge ace. It had sharp fangs and claws, and its eyes glowed red in the dim light. The Aswang turned its head towards Ailing Nina and let out a deafening roar. Ailing Nina was frozen in fear, unable to move or speak. She wanted to call out to her baby, but no sound came out of her mouth. The Aswang slowly approached her, and she could feel its hot, fetid breath on her skin. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the end, but it never came. Instead, she heard a voice in her head that seemed to come from her baby. "Mama," he said, "don't be afraid. I'm here." Suddenly, Ailing Nina felt a surge of strength. She grabbed a rock from the ground and threw it at the Aswang. The rock hit the monster in the head, and it let out a roar of pain. Using this moment of opportunity, Ailing Nina ran to her baby and cradled him in her arms. She didn't know how, but somehow her son was still alive. But she also knew that the Aswang would not let them leave, so as if on cue, the Aswang lunged at them, its claws extended. But before it could reach them, Ailing Nina shielded her baby with her own body. To her surprise, the Aswang hesitated for a moment before backing away. It snarled at them, then turned and fled into the darkness. Ailing Nina and her son were safe, or so she thought. When Ailing Nina returned home, she was greeted by worried faces of her family and friends. They had been searching for her and were concerned about her well-being. When they heard about what had happened in the forest, they were shocked and saddened. Everyone tried to comfort ailing Nana, but she couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. She kept having nightmares about the Aswang and the cave filled with skulls. She also couldn't understand why the Aswang had spared her and her son. Days turned into weeks, but Nana couldn't bring herself to leave the house. She was too scared of what might happen if she stepped outside. Her friends and family urged her to seek professional help, but she refused. She knew that no one would believe her story, so she kept it to herself. Then one day, Nana's son started acting strange. He would stare into the distance for hours and seem to be talking to someone. Nana was worried, but she didn't know what to do. One night, Nana's son disappeared from his bed. She searched the house, but he was nowhere to be found. Panicked, she called out for him, but there was no answer. She knew that the Aswang had come back for her son, and she rushed to the forest to search for him, but it was too late. The Aswang had already taken him away. In her desperation, Nana did something that she never thought she would do. She called upon the Aswang, begging it to return her son, and to her surprise, the Aswang appeared before her in its true form. It was huge, with a body like a giant pig and a face like a terrifying demon. Nana was scared, but she stood her ground and demanded that the Aswang return her son. The Aswang sneered at her and spoke in a voice that was like nails on a chalkboard. "You think I will give him back to you? He is mine now?" Nana screamed in anguish, but the Aswang ignored her and disappeared into the forest. Nana refused to give up. She continued to search for her son, calling out his name until she was hoarse, but she never found him. And so Nana was left with nothing but her grief and the guilt of what had happened to her first child. She knew that she should move on, but she couldn't. She was trapped in a nightmare that never ended. The people in the community eventually forgot about Nana and her missing baby. They moved on with their lives, and the incident became a thing of the past. But for Nana, the pain never faded. She spent her days wandering around the town, talking to herself and muttering about this. The townspeople pitied her, but they also feared her. They thought that she was crazy and dangerous, so they began to avoid her, and soon she was living on the streets. All alone, Nana continued to search for her son, but she'd never found him. And so the story of Nana, the woman who lost her son to an Aswang, became a local legend, a cautionary tale told to children to keep them from wandering into the forest.